We are live in the Tammy Moorer trial. Right now, the prosecution is giving their closing statements. I'm going to take this opportunity to bring in Gene Rossi. He's a criminal defense attorney, but also a former prosecutor. Gene, thank you so much for being with us. A lot to break down in this case. So right now, we see the prosecutor, a lot of focus on the timeline. It's displayed prominently as she gives her closing argument. What, in your mind, is the most compelling evidence for the prosecution as this case goes to the jury?
The silence of the cell phone activity. After he had made a call to her or vice versa, after that moment, there's silence on the part of all the cell phones. And at that time of the day, it's in the morning, and at that moment, December 18th, that is devastating evidence for the defendant. I did want to add something, Misty. For the life of me, I do not know why the prosecutors did not charge kidnapping resulting in murder.
It's interesting you say that, Gene, because those were the initial charges, and then they dropped the murder charge. What do you think could have made them do that?
Not scared. They probably thought that the jury didn't have enough to find guilty on murder. But here's the thing. You charge 2 counts or 1, and you have a lesser included instruction. Conspiracy to kidnap resulting in murder, and you'd have a specific jury question on was there murder or resulting in death. And if they don't find that, then they just have kidnapping. Here's why I don't like the charge. In her closing, how many times did the prosecutor say she's dead?
Right.
How many times did she say they murdered her? All she said was, with her hand pointing towards the family, she's gone. What? They kidnapped her and they killed her. In U.S. District Court in Alexandria, Virginia, United States versus J. Lentz, Mr. J. Lentz, L-E-N-T-Z, look it up. We charged kidnapping resulting in death. He murdered his wife, with whom he was having a custody battle, and we couldn't find the body. I think they didn't charge murder because they don't have a body, but I'm sorry. She's dead.
Right. And Gene, and we know that we've covered them here on this network, and we've certainly seen many cases where there are no body murder cases where convictions do happen based on circumstantial evidence, despite the fact that the body isn't there. So that certainly is a head scratcher. Do you think the jury is confused by that?
Yes. I think they will find her guilty of kidnapping, but I'll guarantee you the jury, Misty, is looking at all those charts. By the way, when you're doing an opening or closing, use 1 chart. Don't put up 7 charts and then the jury's reading your charts while you're talking.
Yeah, well, you know how it is, Gene. Optics certainly do matter when you're going and doing your opening or closing. You want to make it concise, clear, and get to the point and not confuse the jury further. Gene, stay with us. We're going to have more with you soon. But right now, we have to go to a break. Stick with us. This trial is getting exciting. Just finished their closing arguments in the Tammy Moorer case. It looks like the court has gone to a sidebar for a little while before the defense gets up and starts to present their side of the case. Let's bring in Gene Rossi. Gene, what do you think the defense is going to focus on now that we've seen the prosecution's close? That's supposed to be the roadmap for the jury. What's the defense going to say in response?
Let's talk about charts. If I were the defense attorney, I've seen this done to me so many times. You put at the top of the chart, you put reasonable doubt. And below it, you do the following. You talk about there's no confession. There's no DNA. There's no body. There's no evidence, direct evidence to suggest that they conspired. All you have are cell phone records with gaps, and the prosecution is trying to extrapolate and sticking to the theme you had in the opening, square peg, round hole. That's exactly what I would do.
Certainly, they're going to be focusing on all of that, Gene. That's great insight. And guess what? The defense attorney is up beginning the closing now. So let's go live to the court. The defense in closing arguments in the Tammy Moorer case. Gene, you hit the nail on the head. Every point you made before we dove back into the courtroom is what the defense attorney is focused on. Are you surprised?
No, he called me last night. I'm joking. I'm joking. No, and here's why. Actually, he is doing a phenomenal job. I love his style. And Misty, there are no charts. It's good old-fashioned advocacy, just like Abe Lincoln. It's beautiful. And you know what he brought out? He's mocking the prosecution, and he's doing it in a respectful way. The whole Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, he's saying that was a fairy tale. And the prosecutor violated rule number 1. If you're going to tell a joke or use an analogy in your closing, be very careful. Save it for rebuttal, because a good defense attorney is going to turn it around. And you know what else I would have done? I would have said she talks about duck hunting and deer hunting. Well, this case is about that dog won't hunt. Square peg, round hole.
Yeah, and he's absolutely making those points, and I agree with you. I think he's doing a phenomenal job, but I want to piggyback on something you just brought up. That's the respect factor. He's going after the prosecution, going after their case in a very respectful way. Yes. Now, what's your opinion on Tammy Moore's testimony? Because she was getting pretty feisty on cross-examination. Do you think that plays negatively or positively to the jury?
I think it was a net negative in front of the jury, because if this person did not commit the crime, she wouldn't have reason to get very testy like she did in the trial from the clips I saw. And it sort of reinforced, her testimony sort of reinforced the narrative about Tammy, that she is controlling, she has a little bit of a temper, she can be vindictive, and she's extremely jealous. And her demeanor and her body language on the stand and direct and cross sort of reinforced that narrative. And I think it was a net plus for the government. After hearing the closing of the defense attorney, I think there's a decent chance you could have a hung jury here.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gene. And just to remind our audience, Sandy Moore, whose trial was held previously, Tammy's husband, did result in a hung jury. So only time will tell. We do have to go to a commercial break, but stick with us. We're almost to the end of this trial. You don't want to miss a second. We're listening to the defense closing arguments in the Tammy Moore case. Gene Rossi, now you're a criminal defense attorney, but you've also been a prosecutor. I think this defense attorney is doing an excellent job, a lot of focus on what the prosecution does not have, and pointing to even to specific arguments that the prosecution made. We talked about the possibility of a hung jury. What about an acquittal?
I got to tell you, if I've been charged with murder or kidnapping, I may hire Greg McCollum, the defense attorney. I really like his style, and the reason I like it is he's very thoughtful and logical, and he uses phrases like, really? Really? Couldn't you have done a better job than that? And he tore apart that expert on that whole, analysis of the truck lighting. He's mentioned Christmas lights. And you know what? I may go from hung to acquittal. I think he's doing a really terrific job. Yeah,
he really is. I think he's focused. He's leading the jury down the path with the defense theory of the case, which is essentially that the prosecutor never should have brought this case because they lacked the evidence that would be needed to fulfill that standard beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, we spoke about it briefly before. I think the factor that's the worst for the defense is actually Tammy Moore's performance on the stand. That could be the one factor that sticks in the jury's mind.
Right. And what I think will happen in rebuttal is that prosecutor is going to awaken and just either he or she, I think it'll be the female prosecutor, will just go after Tammy Moore's testimony a lot stronger than when she did it in the initial closing, because at that point you'll realize if they believe Tammy Moore, then she will be found not guilty. Forget the hung. But if they believe Tammy Moore, they'll be found not guilty. So in the rebuttal, the prosecutor is going to come out guns blazing.
I think you're right about that, and we will be here to capture it all. Right now, we have to go to a break, but stick with us and come back to watch the rest of this trial. We are live in the Tammy Moore trial. Gene Rossi, thank you so much for being here. Now, look, you predicted the defense closing statement to the T. You made a prediction for the prosecution rebuttal. But wait. There's been convictions on cases that are circumstantial evidence, right? I mean, why not this one?
I'll go back to the case I mentioned a few moments ago, United States versus J. Lentz, L-E-N-T-Z. Nobody, very circumstantial, although there was incriminating evidence, DNA, but it wasn't powerful. You can get a guilty verdict on a no-body murder, which this is. But I got to go back to the closing argument. What he basically did was he showed sympathy for the loss of Heather Elvis, but he also kind of said, you know what? She really wasn't a saint. She slept in her car. She had various jobs. You know, I feel badly for her. We feel badly for her, but you know, there could be other people that could have done this. That's reasonable doubt.
And that's what the defense is absolutely focused on in this case, that standard, reasonable doubt. And you believe the defense did it. Is that your prediction, Gene Rossi?
I think we have a very good chance of a hung jury. Hung jury.
And again, and I mispronounced the name before, it's Sidney Moorer that previously he stood trial and that resulted in a hung jury. Gene Rossi, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights have been great. We really do appreciate it, and we're going to keep an eye out to see if your predictions come true. I got my money on you. Help me get some lotto numbers next time, though, Gene, okay? So right now, we do have to go to a break, but stick with us because we're going to be covering the remainder of this trial. We have to see how the prosecution rebuts this. Stick with us for the rest.